Connor Hayes had wandered slightly off the tourist path in Chernobyl's winter forest, searching for the perfect photograph. When he knelt to examine what looked like old Soviet debris beneath the snow, his hands uncovered a sealed metal container. Officials arrived with detection equipment, their faces tense as they scanned the rusted box. When historians finally opened the container days later, they discovered something that would validate decades of denied claims. Connor Hayes had been planning this trip for 2 years. Every spare dollar from his photography work went into a single envelope marked Chernobyl. He'd explored abandoned hospitals, forgotten factories, and crumbling mansions across 3 countries. But the exclusion zone was different. It was the place every urban explorer dreamed about, and most would never see. The tour cost more than his rent for 2 months. His friends thought he was crazy. His family worried he'd come back glowing. But Connor couldn't shake the pull of those frozen forests and empty buildings. He needed to see it with his own eyes, to capture something that felt real and untouched. Victor, his guide, had been leading tours through the zone for 8 years. He knew every approved path, every safe spot, every rule that kept tourists alive and legal. The guide's weathered face and cautious eyes told stories of 1,000 close calls. The group that morning was small, just 6 people bundled against the bitter cold. Victor made his speech about radiation, about staying on marked paths, about not touching anything without permission. His words hung in the frigid air like warnings from another world. The winter landscape stretched out before them like something from another world. Snow blanketed everything in silence. Skeletal trees reached toward a gray sky. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, though Connor knew that was probably just his imagination working overtime. Most of the group stayed close to the van, taking selfies and wide shots of the forest. Connor moved farther, still within the safe zone markers, searching for something more interesting than tourist snapshots. He wanted images that captured the strange beauty of this place, the way nature had reclaimed what humans had abandoned. His breath created small clouds in the freezing air as he walked deeper into the white wilderness. That's when he noticed something odd. Beneath a fallen tree, partially covered by snow, a dark corner of metal caught the light. At first, Connor assumed it was just more debris. The zone was full of Soviet-era junk, rusted tools, broken equipment, scattered remnants of the cleanup effort. But this looked different, more deliberate, less random. Something about it made his pulse quicken. He moved closer, camera still in hand. The object wasn't sitting on top of the snow like something recently dropped. It was partially buried, as if it had been there for years. Connor set down his camera bag and knelt in the snow. His gloves were already cold and wet, but he started brushing away the powder anyway. The metal container emerged slowly, about the size of a shoebox covered in rust and corrosion, but somehow still intact. A lock, badly corroded, held it sealed. Connor's mind started racing through possibilities. What if this was something medical? What if it contained radioactive samples? What if he'd just exposed himself to something deadly? His hands began to tremble. Not from the cold anymore, but from a creeping sense that he'd crossed some invisible line. This wasn't like finding old furniture in an abandoned house. This was the exclusion zone. Everything here carried the weight of disaster. Every instinct screamed at him that he just made a terrible mistake. Connor stood up quickly and called for Victor. His voice came out higher than he intended, tight with worry. The guide looked annoyed at first. Tourists were always finding things and making drama. But when Victor reached Connor's side and saw the container, his expression changed completely. The color drained from the guide's weathered face. Victor pulled out his radio immediately. His Russian was too fast for Connor to follow, but the tone was clear. This was serious. He told Connor to step back, to not touch anything else, to stay exactly where he was. The other tourists noticed the commotion and started drifting over, curious and concerned. The mood shifted instantly. What had been an exciting adventure suddenly felt dangerous. People whispered about contamination, about whether they should be standing this close. One woman backed toward the van. A man asked if they needed to evacuate. Victor kept his voice calm but firm. Everyone needed to stay put until officials arrived. Connor's mind wouldn't stop spinning. Had he contaminated himself? Would he need medical treatment? What if the container held something that could hurt everyone here? He thought about his family, about how he'd have to tell them he'd found something potentially radioactive and decided to dig it up. The minutes crawled by like hours in the frozen silence. The wait felt endless. Victor made calls, spoke in urgent Russian, checked his dosimeter repeatedly. Connor stood in the snow, staring at the container he'd uncovered, wondering if this would be the worst decision of his life. The cold seeped through his clothes, but he barely noticed. Fear had a way of making everything else disappear. Officials finally arrived with equipment Connor had only seen in movies. They wore protective gear and carried detection devices, moving with practiced efficiency. They scanned the container from every angle. They tested the snow around it. They checked Connor himself, waving instruments near his hands and clothes. Each beep of the detector felt like a countdown to catastrophe. Then came the moment Connor had been dreading. One of the officials looked at his colleague and said something in Russian. Victor translated. The readings were normal. No elevated radiation. Connor felt his knees go weak with relief. But the officials still weren't done. They carefully secured the container and informed Connor he needed to come with them for documentation and medical examination. The real nightmare was only beginning. The next 2 days were a nightmare. Connor underwent test after test, blood work, scans, examinations. He answered the same questions over and over. Where exactly did he find it? How long did he touch it? Did he open it? What made him dig it up? He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every small headache felt like radiation poisoning. Every moment of nausea seemed like a symptom. The officials told him nothing about what was inside the container. They just kept asking questions, taking notes, making him sign forms. Connor began to wonder if he'd uncovered something classified, something that was going to cause serious problems for him. Maybe evidence of illegal dumping. Maybe something from the cleanup that wasn't supposed to be found. The silence from the officials was almost worse than any answer could be. On the third day, Connor's phone rang. A research facility wanted to meet with him. Not hospital staff, historians. Connor had no idea what that meant, but he went, desperate for any information about what he'd found. The team that greeted him looked serious but not alarmed. They led him to a private room and closed the door. Connor's heart pounded as they explained what had been inside the container. Not radioactive material, not medical waste, not classified government secrets. Letters, photographs, all wrapped carefully in protective plastic, preserved against decay. Documents from 1986, written by workers who'd been sent to manage the disaster's aftermath. But these weren't official reports or work logs. They were personal letters that had never been sent. Messages the workers had written to their families but couldn't safely share at the time. The historians spread some of the documents across the table, protected now in clear sleeves. Connor saw handwritten Russian script, faded photographs of young men in work clothes, diagrams and notes in margins. The ink was faded, but the truth within remained sharp and clear. The historians began translating portions, workers describing radiation levels far higher than what officials had told them, families given false reassurances while their relatives grew sicker, real numbers of people falling ill that didn't match any public records, instructions to lie about exposure, to minimize the danger, to keep the truth contained. Each translated word felt like opening a door that had been locked for decades. One letter made the historians pause. A worker had written to his wife, explaining why he was hiding these documents instead of sending them. He feared what he knew would be buried along with everyone who knew it. He wasn't sure he'd survive to tell the truth himself, so he was creating this cache for someone, someday, to discover. The letter ended with a single haunting line. "If you're reading this, I kept my promise." The historians explained their theory. Someone, likely a liquidator who worked in this specific area, had risked severe punishment or worse to preserve these accounts. The location where Connor found the container wasn't random. It was calculated, close enough to marked paths that it might eventually be discovered when the zone opened to limited access, but hidden well enough to survive decades. It was a message in a bottle, buried in radioactive snow. Connor felt the weight of what he'd stumbled into. These documents weren't just historical curiosities. They were evidence of systematic deception. Proof that workers and their families had been lied to, that the truth had been deliberately suppressed. The researchers were already working to contact descendants of the liquidators mentioned in the letters. Within weeks, the discovery spread through academic circles and advocacy groups. Museums requested to preserve the documents. Families who'd spent decades fighting for recognition finally had validation for what they'd always suspected but couldn't prove. Several governments agreed to review compensation claims that had previously been denied. The voices that had been silenced for nearly 40 years were finally being heard. Connor's photographs of the discovery site became part of the official record. Messages flooded his inbox from families across Europe. One woman told him the letters confirmed what her grandfather had whispered on his deathbed, things no one had believed until now. Each message carried the weight of decades of grief, anger, and vindication. What Connor had feared was a catastrophic mistake, had instead uncovered a truth someone had risked everything to preserve. The workers who'd hidden these letters had made a bet on the future. They gambled that someday, when the zone became accessible again, an ordinary person would stumble upon their testament and ensure the world finally heard what they'd been forbidden to say. Their gamble had paid off. And you, would you have had the courage to dig up that container, not knowing what deadly secret might be buried in the snow?